Decentralize the Summit. Please welcome to the stage Director of Public Policy at Foundry, Kyle Schneps, co-founder of Bridger Solutions, Ben Kincaid.
There we go. My name is Kyle Schneps. I'm Director of Public Policy at Foundry, and I'm really excited to be here today with you all. Most of us devote our time and efforts to this industry and to this technology because we believe in the underlying principles of decentralization. And in that spirit, I'm proud to be a part of Foundry's Decentralizing the Summit presentation today. And what that means is for the first time ever at a conference, we have decided to decentralize our stage time, handing the mic off to 3 individuals who had participated in a contest and would not otherwise have the opportunity to speak to the audience today. And I'm looking forward to introducing them to you all later on. But first, I'd like to talk to you about public policy. I flew in from Washington yesterday, and there's no doubt that the FTX fallout has set us back considerably. But I plan to share with you today lessons that I've learned over the past 14 months fighting for Bitcoin mining in New York State, because these lessons are applicable everywhere. And I also plan to share my belief that it is only through a unified public policy message that we will be able to advance our cause as an industry and embetter our reputation. And with that said, I want to share with you a story. When I was in undergrad, I studied a lot of ancient civilizations, classical myths, classical military history. And I found a myth actually that wasn't in classical Greece, but was in West Africa. And I wanted to share this story with you because I found my mind drifting back to this story over the past year. And the story is as follows. So there are 2 farmers and they live across the road from each other. They're families and they are best friends. They eat together, they drink together, they work together. And they just have a good time together. They are absolute best friends and compatriots. One day there is a god of mischief, a spirit of tricks, if you will. And he says, I'm going to trick these farmers. I'm going to play a trick on them. And so he puts on a hat, and one side of the hat is red and the other is blue. And he runs down the road between the 2 farmers as fast as he possibly can, which, because it's a spirit, is a blinding flash, a blinding visualization. And the farmers see this. They look up from their crops and they see this blinding vision flying down the road. And they see each other later on, and one farmer says to the other, he says, did you see that blinding vision, the spirit just flashing down the road? It was amazing. The other says, I know, it was incredible. I can't believe we actually saw a godly spirit like that flash of light. Did you see how blue it was? And the other says, wait, what do you mean? It's red. No, it's blue. And then they spend the rest of their lives fighting over whether the same vision's hat was red or blue. And so the lesson here is somewhat obvious, but I find myself going back to that myth a lot because I see a lot of sometimes petty bickering or argumentation within our industry. And public policy is a place that we don't have to have that. It's the one place where we can coalesce into a unified, message so that we don't find ourselves bickering over whether the hat is red or blue. We can actually focus on the overall vision that we're trying to get, which we mostly agree on. And I think this is going to be really important to public policy moving forward. And with that said, I want to tell you a bit about what happened in New York and some of the lessons learned that we can apply in any state and at the federal level. So what happened in New York? There was a very hyper-localized issue of a Bitcoin miner in upstate New York that a local group had been fighting against far before it was actually a Bitcoin mining facility. These groups, these ESG lobbying groups with pretty deep pockets, you see some of them listed here, Earth Justice, Greenpeace, partnered with a local politician who was relatively unknown, but saw some opportunities in trying to drum this up. And so we went from having a very local issue, which was then blown up into a statewide 3-year blanket ban on Bitcoin mining. And so one of the lessons I want to take away from this is, one, as an industry in public policy, we need to know our enemy, right? We need to know who's attacking us. And in this case, and in most cases, we're going to find that it is a small group of highly paid lobbyists that are, paid well to achieve small victories in order to get the next round of donations. And it's important to note that this is not all people who care about the environment. It's our job to recognize that there's a huge overlap between Bitcoiners, miners, crypto enthusiasts, and environmentalists. But we need to be able to target those folks and help persuade them what our message is and our vision for the future is, and recognize who the absolute paid enemy is in this situation. We also have to recognize, why are we targets? We have to ask ourselves, why are we targets in this public policy realm? We all know that, Bitcoin mining uses 0.2% of global energy consumption, but the average person doesn't. And they don't yet know what our value proposition is. It's not woven into the fabric of society. And so it's our job to try to start to educate folks to help them realize how important we are and not be victim as a result of this to scapegoating, which we are very prone to be subject to. And that brings us to the second lesson: know our value. We need to demonstrate the value that crypto brings to society. We need to be able to say, yes, we do use energy. I would argue that it's a negligible amount, and we can contextualize this for you and comparing to other industries, apples to apples, and not to ridiculous things like countries. But the energy we do use, look what we're using it for. We are providing jobs. This industry is a huge job provider across the United States, and especially when times are super good during a bull market, we are expanding rapidly. We need to tell policymakers about renewable energy incentivization, right? This is a very unique use case for this technology, one that cannot be duplicated elsewhere. And then lastly, financial empowerment. This is super important. And if this is a couple of years ago, we would talk to policymakers and they would roll their eyes about this. But now we have tons of data from all sorts of neutral third-party sources that show demonstrably that communities of color are investing in this technology at a double-digit percentage increase over the majority white population. And the reason they're doing this is because, according to them and what they've said, is that for a long time they felt victim of predatory practices in traditional finance, and now they're looking for something that levels the playing field. And we need to be able to stress this to politicians who aren't yet aware of it. Which brings us to lesson 3, focusing on offense. Our best defense at this point is a strong offense when dealing with public policy. We can spend all day long trying to justify our energy use, but we're still playing on their side of the field. And when you're on their side of the field, no matter how well you do, they're always going to move the goalpost. So if you get to 80% renewable energy, they're going to say you need to be at 85, right? It's their side, and you can't score points on their side of the field. And so we need to be using our value proposition as just outlined, the renewable energy, jobs, financial inclusion, all of these things to build bridges. And this is something we did in New York, and I think can be done everywhere. Some of our biggest allies that we've developed are the Black, Hispanic, and Asian caucus in the New York State Assembly, because they realize that their constituents actually care about this, because their constituents are trying to build generational wealth through this technology. And I'd say lastly, in focusing on offense, secondly, we should be focusing on the egalitarian nature of proof of work. So often, and I believe erroneously, politicians will try to, and the media will try to pit proof of work and proof of stake against each other. When it comes to defending proof of work, we need to be able to highlight the egalitarian benefits of this work, and that there's no CEO of Bitcoin, right? There's no VC firm behind Bitcoin that is collecting most of the rewards, right? So it's a more egalitarian structure. And we need to collaborate across the industry so that we have an actual unified message, so that we're not, like in the story, bickering over a red hat or a blue hat, that we're staying on point and we're sharing the same vision. And the last lesson here is to be proactive, not reactive. So often in the past, we have been caught in allowing legislation to happen to us, right? We want to be ahead of legislation. And when we're behind legislation, we end up in a situation where we're scrambling and we're trying to throw money at anybody who says they can make the problem go away. And this is incredibly costly in the long term. We want to have people that are paying attention to this when times are good and when times are bad. And so that can be really helpful. We also want to create our own legislation. We want to work with staff on legislative staff to try to create legislation that people can actually feel like they're getting something done legislatively, but also they feel that, they are doing something positive for the industry. We want to join industry coalitions if we can, right? This is a way of unifying our voice. And we want to partner with labor unions. This is super important, something we did in New York that can be done everywhere. The more ability we have to partner with labor unions, the more headway we're going to make with policymakers. And so to wrap up, we cannot claim that New York was some massive success by any means. But we did make some big headway. We were able to cut this 3-year blanket moratorium to 2 years. We were able to get it so that it was only applying to behind the meter at fossil fuel power plants. And we were able to make so many connections that it literally came down to the final minutes under the cover of darkness with a lot of arm twisting by leadership that they were actually able to squeeze this through. And the bill did pass the legislature, but it's still with the governor. We'll see what she does. But in general, it did unite the industry and let us know and serve as a case study. And so it did allow us to learn, some of the things that work with politicians that may be adversarial to start with, but we can start to build bridges. And so with that case study said, I want to open this up and introduce, because we do want to share our stage time with our 3 winners. I wanted to open this up to the first person who's going to speak. This is Ben Kincaid, and he's going to address all of you. And he's the co-founder of a new Bitcoin mining company that's going to be working in Africa. And so please welcome him to share the stage and decentralize the summit. Thank you.
Thanks, Kyle. About 2 months ago, I left an exciting and very stable career in the United States Foreign Service to start a Bitcoin mining company. Co-founders, Jake and John, left the special operations community doing incredible and impactful work to defend our country. Why would we leave that? And why Bitcoin? Over the course of our careers, we saw and worked through more and more complex problems in the world, but without the solutions needed to confront them. Plenty of tactical wins, but too many strategic misses. And that's probably an understatement. Like many of you, we had our Bitcoin aha moments in different ways and at different times. For us, it was understanding that Bitcoin is simultaneously a freedom-inducing technology and a check on the human temptation abroad and at home to abuse power. It was also the realization that Bitcoin mining could bring economic empowerment and an energy revolution to all corners of the earth. In sum, a game changer at just the right moment in history. We couldn't unsee it, and we had to be part of it. Having spent the last 2 decades operating in Africa and other frontier markets, we are all too familiar with the human consequences of exploitation, tyranny, injustice, corruption, and conflict over resources. It's difficult to unleash your potential as a nation and people when the crushing weight of bad external debt, food insecurity, insufficient access to medical care, unreliable electricity, and poor infrastructure drag on your development. We believe that getting more energy to more people and creating economies around low or zero cost energy will fix a lot of the root problems in the world, and most dramatically in impoverished but resource-rich regions of Africa. So how do we start? We use energy that already exists in new ways through Bitcoin mining. Across Africa are what we call bridge to nowhere renewable energy generation projects whose output is wasted or stranded with little to no reliable transmission infrastructure to take it from the source to meet distant demand. Projects like a 100 megawatt wind farm in the Sahel that delivers exactly zero of that energy to the people. Now imagine monetizing some of that energy at the source and in a way that provides revenue, local jobs, and helps build out the grid elements to deliver that energy to poor areas. This means it can help bootstrap infrastructure development and support productive activities in places that were previously uneconomic, a game changer for the continent. In the long run, this may even transform patterns of human settlement in ways that relieve the burdens of overpopulated urban areas in many parts of Africa. We plan to leverage our extensive experience in the region and partner with receptive African governments to give them more control, not less, over their natural resources. We know this is an attractive proposition to many leaders that desire a path to energy and economic independence that avoids the debt and geopolitical traps laid by more powerful states. Simply, the monetization of low or zero cost trapped energy at scale will deliver enormous returns to investors and African nations alike, while unlocking human potential through the build out of energy infrastructure. And of course, to borrow from both Michael Saylor and Alex Gladstein, Bitcoin is a Trojan horse for freedom and sovereignty at the individual, village, and national levels. The only element scarcer than Bitcoin in the universe is time. Perhaps that is the reason, more than anything else, that we made this bold pivot in our lives and our careers. We see no better use of this time, of our time and energy than this effort. We have this community, all of you, to thank for educating us and inspiring us to action. So this is our call for action. We can't do this by ourselves, and we are just getting started. The time is now. We're blessed to have some of the best minds in the world helping us, from Bitcoin-focused geopolitical thought leaders to mining and energy industry experts to former senior US officials. Our mission is to ignite what we believe will usher in and renew self-sovereignty, economic independence, and human flourishing. Please find me or Jake or John and let us know your ideas on how we can best execute this mission together. Thank you.
Oil and gas attorney, Sarah Stogner.
Hi guys, my name is Sarah Stogner. I am an oil and gas lawyer, and I'm sure you're thinking, well, why is an oil and gas lawyer talking at a blockchain conference? I would like to claim credit that 6 years ago when I moved to the Permian Basin and we had all these flares going, and if you've ever flown into Midland or Odessa, right, you come in and it's all these lights. And I thought, why can't we be mining crypto out here? Or why can't we be growing cannabis or tomatoes or whatever you want to do? And everyone was like, Sarah, that's crazy. Now, right, we have a whole host of people with different mining opportunities. And so when I saw that there was an opportunity to present, I thought I would really like to talk to you guys about some of the lessons learned in the oil and gas industry and what I think is a potential for true partnership between operators and miners. But I also want to give you guys kind of a warning on some of the pitfalls. And so right now, I'm licensed to practice in Louisiana, Texas, and Colorado. And in Louisiana and Colorado, we've seen a little bit more enforcement on the air side and on actually preventing flares and things like this. In Texas, it is still very much the Wild West as far as enforcement goes. And if you guys Google me, you can see that I ran for political office. And so I have a little bit of a bias against our current regulatory scheme, because unfortunately, I think what's happened in oil and gas and what I think is possible to happen in the crypto space and the blockchain space is a misunderstanding of the opportunities and the operational realities. And then you get bad policy by career-long politicians who aren't actually out there doing it. And whether or not they're well-intentioned or not, at the end of the day, what ends up happening is you have kind of crappy regulations that are poorly enforced, and then it becomes crony capitalism, and it's not true capitalism. And the great thing about real capitalism is that if you've got a good idea and you're willing to put in the hard work, you should be able to do it, right? And unfortunately, in the oil and gas space, we've got a lot of regulations that aren't really effective. They're not very rational, and they're not well enforced. And so what's happened is we now have, currently in the state of Texas alone, 150,000 wellbores that are listed as inactive, but that are currently, they're open subsurface, right? So they haven't been plugged out. In Texas, if you're an oil and gas operator and you plug a well, you are liable in perpetuity for making sure that that well gets plugged. And a few years ago, the Texas Railroad Commission, which despite its name regulates oil and gas in the state of Texas, has really tried to ramp up their enforcement, allegedly, and making people plug out these wells. But what we have right now is literally hundreds of thousands of well bores that may be leaking methane, maybe leaking salt water, whatever it is, that are sitting there because there is an adverse incentive to not plug out those wells. And so when you are going and you're talking to these guys, and like I said, I think there's a real opportunity for collaboration between the oil and gas sector and the blockchain sector of taking those stranded resources, and whether it be from wind, solar, the good thing is it's power agnostic, right? It doesn't matter what the source of power is. If you can help connect those missing pieces, there's an opportunity there. But what I worry about is the oil and gas industry recognizing that it has a serious problem in the future of retiring these assets. Because once we put a hole in the ground, the best cement only lasts 100 years or so. And right now we cement them up and then we cut them off and we walk away. But if they transfer a wellbore to another person, then that new entity can take, in Texas, the entire scope of the asset retirement obligations going forward. And so if you guys are going and you're talking about policy with policymakers, or you're doing private deals with oil and gas companies, be aware that especially in Texas, where we haven't had very much enforcement on mechanical integrity and maintenance over the years in those oil and gas assets, is that there is significant latent liability that is just waiting to kind of spring back to life. And so we're right now again in Texas, we handle about 15 million barrels per day of produced water. And most of that is re-injected into subsurface reservoirs. And now we're having problems. There was an earthquake earlier this week. We inject it deep, it causes earthquakes, and we inject it shallower, and it comes into communication with all of these old well bores, and they've started springing back to life. I call them zombie wells. That our real zombie apocalypse isn't going to be humans, it's going to be well bores. But I promise I'm not here for doom and gloom. And I'm here to encourage you guys to look for opportunities. But I think that the opportunity is not necessarily with these older well bores. It's with the newer wells that are coming online that have a lot of natural gas that's clean, that's not full of H2S, that's going to eat through your generators and all that. There's some real opportunity. But if we are not intellectually honest, and you guys are going out there and you're lobbying, or you're getting assigned well bores, there is very much some significant long-term liability to the landowner, to the state of Texas, to the mineral owners. And there's a lot of unknowns on how we're going to handle financial obligations based on contracts that a lot of times were signed in the 1920s and 1930s. And so a lot of the mineral leases across the country are really old. And I guarantee you, when they were signing these mineral leases in the 1920s and 30s, they had no idea about modern day technologies, right? They weren't planning on tertiary recovery using CO2. They weren't planning on Bitcoin mining. Right? Like, this is totally out of the question. And so you've got these really old contracts now that you're trying to kind of navigate, I guess, the legal implications for very old contracts. And you've got different stakeholders, right? The landowners have one incentive. A lot of times you've got mineral owners where those minerals were severed years ago. They don't have anything to do with the surface anymore. And so what's reasonable and necessary use of the surface? If you guys partner with an oil and gas operator and you want to put a container out there with your equipment, do you need a surface lease, right? These are all things that are going to have to be determined, unfortunately, by a very inefficient court system and a very inefficient regulatory and legislative system that is skewed to keeping the status quo the way that it's been. And so I don't have any great answers. I have a lot of questions. I have a lot of suggestions for things that you should be looking out for. And then we're going to need to have some really difficult conversations, and hopefully we can figure out and get ahead of those so that people that are trying to do the right thing, trying to help clean up emissions, right? Trying to help our grid resiliency. But guess what? There's a lot of people that profit from a non-resilient grid. Right? There's a lot of people that profit from the current way things are done. And unfortunately, trying to get past that inertia is very difficult. So my name's Sarah Stogner. I'm happy to talk to you guys. I don't have the answers. I am really good at connecting people that have ideas, and I love to connect and help solve solutions. So if there's something that I can do for you guys in that way of saying, hey, I don't know, but I know these guys over here have been handling it or dealing with these same issues, and I can put you in touch. But at the end of the day, we've got a lot of lawyers, a lot of insurance people, and no offense to all the old white dudes in the room, but it's a bunch of old white dudes that are afraid of being irrelevant. And so when you start talking about things like immutable ledgers and having title on the blockchain and not needing to have insurance because you can actually have smart contracts with things that trigger data, and then the money just exchanges and the things are determined, and you've got an entire ecosystem ripe for disruption and innovation in the oil and gas industry, and they are struggling with what to do with these assets that really aren't an asset anymore, they're a liability. And they're starting to realize that. And so if we can come in as an industry and say, hey, we've got a whole nother way that we can look at this extra water, this extra stranded energy, then there's some real opportunity there to make a difference and to actually do good, to help our economy, to help our grid, and at the same time, I think create some really good use cases to overcome what has become now this FTX that right? Like we should have played a drinking game with every time that acronym's mentioned. We'd all be wasted by now. So thank you so much. I appreciate the opportunity to speak, and I hope everyone has a lovely Friday. Thanks.
Professor at University of Houston, Phil Snyder.
Well,
What's up, blockheads?
yeah, I'm a voice actor. Come on, wake up, computer. It's getting easy, getting even with me. Come on. All right. And I thought I had it all set. I remembered my password. So my family and I moved here from LA about 10 years ago and started teaching at the University of Houston. I was a voice actor there, doing the voice of Jiminy Cricket for Disney. It's probably hard for you to believe that. Stuff like do we have anybody here that's played Kingdom Hearts? Yeah, maybe. Oh, okay, there's a hand. Not everybody's yelling out, I did. No, but there are millions of people watching this on streaming service right now. So anyhow, I like Texas so much that, well, I rewrote the words, at least one word to that famous song. You might remember this one. When you wish upon a star. Nope. Lone Star. When you wish upon a lone star, makes no difference who you are, anything your heart desires will come to you. If you're willing to work your butt off for it. We expect people to work hard here in Texas. So since 2013, I've been teaching video production at the University of Houston in the College of Technology. And I got into Bitcoin about 3 years ago now. And I looked around and I checked all the curriculums for all the different colleges in the system and looking to see if anybody was teaching Bitcoin or blockchain or anything like that. I mean, I was teaching video production, still am, 2D and 3D animation and a few other digital media courses. But I didn't find even one course where they were teaching anything about blockchain or video or Bitcoin. And so what I did was I talked to my boss and asked him, I mean, why would anybody want more work? Yeah, now I got more work to do if I'm going to do this, but I just felt it was my fiduciary duty as a professor and had access to the university system. So I asked my boss if I could possibly teach this. And I knew that I had to convince him that it would fit into digital media. So I called it, okay, it's a digital medium of exchange. And it worked. Yeah, so I put together a flyer, had a picture of me on it, holding one of these little familiar golden goodies, right? And I said, with my little talkie bubble here, I said, one of these for every student who enrolls in my class. This was last fall, 2021. And so I asked my boss to send out an email blast, and he did. And he put it this way. Professor Snyder will give 1 Bitcoin to every person who enrolls in this course. So I did get a few emails back from the smarter students, and they said, this is a joke, right? And I said, well, it's not a joke, but yeah. So anyway, my boss was the first recipient of my first lecture at his kitchen table. And I don't think I orange pilled him then, but at least you won't be making outlandish promises like that anymore. So that's good. Now, during that fall semester last year, I heard about the Texas Blockchain Council. And I contacted Lee and asked him if he would speak to my class online. I didn't want him to drive all the way from, down to Houston. That would be just a little bit much. But to my joy and surprise, he agreed to do that. And a couple weeks later, he took time off from remodeling his bathroom. I believe that was what he was doing at the time, and spent an hour with my class telling him about how Texas Blockchain Council was working with the state of Texas and ERCOT in trying to make Texas the most Bitcoin blockchain friendly state in the union. And they were blown away. I mean, they were really, really, I think, inspired and excited about what the potential was. And we got more and more into talking about stabilizing the grid and, all the great, fantastic innovations that are taking place here in this state. And thanks so much to the TBC. So one of my students, Jose, is from El Salvador. And he and his family still lives there. He's I guess he's going to graduate this spring. But he told me that they were very worried about what was going on there, with Bukele's initiative to make Bitcoin legal tender and, all the stuff that was going on. And they were mainly afraid because it was kind of a top-down sort of thing, not really grassroots, not organic in the way you would expect something like that to be accepted by the populace. And so I said, well, why don't you, Jose, make that your research project for your final project and presentation? And he did, and it was great. And I have to say, after he took that deep dive, his fears were very much assuaged. So a little success story there. Another student in this semester, we're still, we got like 2 or 3 weeks left of this semester. Nicole is from Venezuela. And she testified that, fiat currency ruined their lives, ruined their countries. The stories of people going and clubbing cows to death to feed their family are true. It's not an exaggeration. It's not made up. And it's been really tough. But she also knows people whose lives have been saved by mining Bitcoin and using Bitcoin in purchases and things like that. So frankly, I mean, it still gets me now, just a few months later, but there was not a dry eye in that classroom. And I kid you not, I hardly could control myself from weeping out loud. It was very intense. And it's just one of the great benefits of being, on the ground, boots on the ground, and teaching this in this whole space. Bottom line is, we have been, and a lot of people have talked about this, we've been given a great blessing. Bitcoin is a blessing now and in the future and long term. So, I think God is long on Bitcoin. When we're talking 2140 for the last little eensy weensy bit of Bitcoin to be mined, and who knows how much that'll be worth. Of course, what do you compare it to? You compare it to Bitcoin, right? So, but as big a blessing as that is, it puts a huge responsibility on our shoulders. And we all believe that Bitcoin is virtually indestructible and virtually incorruptible. But the problem is, you and I are not indestructible or incorruptible. I could tell you stories, but I'm not going to get into it. So what really matters is for us to take what's going on in this revolution of which we are foot soldiers, take it seriously. I know all of you here, you're serious enough to teach it and learn it and live it. And I would just encourage you to continue doing that, doing what you're doing. You're all teachers. You're not in a classroom maybe, but you're living the life. You're walking the walk as well as talking the talk. And that, there's no substitute for that. That is organic. That is grassroots. And people see that. They see you modeling it and they see you doing it. And that is what's the most important. So my time's just about up. I think I got exactly just enough time. I'll leave you with 4 very encouraging words. Made in America. Oh, no, that was the wrong one. Let me see. Oh, yeah.
Bitcoin. That's all, folks.
Thank you very much.
I'm Lee Bratcher, the president of the Texas Blockchain Council. Thank you to everyone who came out to this year's summit, helping us make it the best one yet. Now more than ever, we need professional industry associations like the TBC to help craft effective policy instead of the CEOs of centralized exchanges roaming the halls of various state capitals or in DC. Texas is quickly becoming the center of the universe for Bitcoin, blockchain, and digital assets. If you want to be part of the future that we are crafting here in Texas, join the TBC today.